All right, this is part 2 of my rules explanation for Griphold Tower. This is, like I said in my first video in part 1, this is an updated version of the game. This is the state of the game right now. I'm developing it for publishing, and you can see one of the main things I added was double-sided monsters and a few different types of abilities. I apologize for going out of order a little bit. There's a couple of things that I need to explain that are going to add a little more depth to the game that I didn't cover in the first video before I go on. The main part of this video will probably be uh, the boss fight, and hopefully that doesn't take us any more than this second part video. The first thing I need to go over is how monster abilities work. So if you remember in the first video, we were just ignoring these and we were going by the HP value that they have and just kind of using strength and abilities. And I went through how these abilities work. So if you missed that, go back and watch part 1. What really causes wrinkles in the game and gives the game its flavor is the different monster abilities. So as you're going through a wave, you have to read these and you'll get accustomed to them. You'll get familiar with them. This one says, other visible creatures are double in health. This is where the monster type comes in. There's a handful of different monster types. This one's a creature. It says other visible creatures are double in health. Visible just means you can see it. That's an easy definition. Default is the front and the second monster are visible. Some character abilities and even monster abilities say peek at third. And so if it says peek at third, or if it just says peek, that means you go like this and you look at who's coming up. I'm familiar enough with the cards that typically I just have to do that and I know what's coming. But you go like this, and if there's an effect you have to resolve right away, you go ahead and do it. Or if you do something and it triggers their effect, they're considered visible. So only the abilities of visible monsters are in effect. If you for some reason know that a monster is coming, I'm not sure why you would, but it's not technically visible, then you don't need to worry about its ability. Like a good example is one of these characters has an ability that sends a monster to the back of the line, and that monster is no longer considered visible until it gets to front or second position. And so even though you know where that monster is and what ability it has, you don't have to worry about it until you see it again. Once you peek at third, this monster is considered visible. And so even though I'm just for ergonomic reasons here, I'm going to cover that back up. I'm just going to remember that he's there. I could leave it like this if I wanted to try to remember. So he's considered visible. And let's say I defeat him. I'm still not able to peek at third. Like I would have to do that ability again, or a monster ability would have to tell me to peek at third. Now, after this guy has moved forward, I'm still only seeing the front and the second monsters like normal again. There are a few different types of monster abilities. There's like a normal monster ability that doesn't have this bolded text. Then there are front monster abilities, and there are second monster abilities, and then there are instant monster abilities. Front and second abilities just tell you that ability only triggers when it reaches that position. So when Spire Ward was in second position, her ability wouldn't trigger. So, for ranged characters, that's actually kind of nice to see those coming. You can prevent that from getting to front. It's a little bit harder with a melee character. I should mention that in terms of range, strength cards are subject to your character's range. So if I wanted to defeat or attack this Lich, I couldn't do it with strength cards because my character is melee. Now, if I use an ability, those are not subject to your character's range. So let's say I really needed this guy to get gone. I'd probably use my flying kick ability, and I would discard a strength card to activate it, and then I could attack equal to my total current strength, and then I could defeat him. And since it is a slot ability with an S, even though I defeated him with the ability, that means I get to slot him. If I had, say, defeated a monster with a normal combat ability, he would have had to go to the back in the underworld. But the slot abilities allow you to slot the monster. The other thing with monsters, let me try to find an instant ability. I should have had one ready for you. There's one. Get rid of these guys. This guy has an instant ability, and that just means you resolve its effects once, and you resolve them as soon as it becomes visible. So this was a bad example because I moved him all the way to front, but let's just say this is the monster in front because I'm noticing he has an instant ability. So let's say I defeated the previous monster, pulled this guy into front with my right hand, and I notice, oh, he has an instant ability. That means I need to resolve it right away. It says flip other visible monsters. Front and second are the only ones visible. If I had peeked at third, then I would flip the third monster as well, but we don't see third right now. It's not visible, so I'll just flip this guy. And then if he had any front or instant abilities, I would resolve that right away. Otherwise, they're typically either you have to do something that would trigger their ability, or it's just an ongoing effect. The other thing that I failed to talk about in terms of character abilities last time was another subtype that I missed. So I actually wrote these down and I forgot to show you here. The two types are combat and rest. Combat have the shields, they're in these positions. That's the same on every character. And then rest abilities have the little tent, and that's on the top right. But then they can be different subtypes. Rest abilities can only be either a normal rest ability or a boss rest ability. So it could have a little bee there, like that little bee would be on this tent, and then it would have some effect that could help you against the boss. The combat abilities can be any of these subtypes, and sometimes multiple. So normal just means nothing in the shield. Slot has the S, that means if it helps reduce the monster's HP, you get to slot it. Boss abilities have the B. We talked through those in the last video, and stock abilities is the one that I didn't talk about. Every character has at least one stock ability, and those are noted by the bolded word stock. And so let's just look at this one. And so I've kind of been playing wrong, you'll notice, because the monk has this stock ability that says monk's range equals front's damage value, which is kind of a fun mechanism where front, in this case, the front monster has a damage value of 2. So even though he's a melee character, his stock ability overrides that, and he would actually get to attack front or second position with strength cards per his ability. But once, like, a monster with damage value of 1 would get in the front, then his range would be back to 1 for strength attacks. Stock abilities are basically free. Most of them are ongoing effects, so if it just says stock in bolded text here, this just applies all the time, and I don't have to do anything to use it. If your stock ability would ever get exhausted, you would not be able to use it anymore. Some characters have a stock once ability. Grab one here. The Huntress has a stock once ability, and so they have that text there that says that. Hers says, do not slot a defeated monster for -1 to boss health. Note that it's a boss ability. Stock once means it's free, but you can only use it once per wave. Except you can, so you use it free the first time, and if I want to use it again, I could actually exhaust it, cover it up, and use it a second time. So those are pretty handy. This one being way up here, I doubt that would happen very often. So stock once abilities, you can only use once per wave. Unless you exhaust it. And what else am I missing on the normal combat mechanisms? I think there was one other thing. I'll think of it, I'm sure. Oh, I remember what it was. It was how there's a couple of restrictions on how you're exhausting your character abilities or taking damage. So if I'm taking damage, I can exhaust whichever one I want. Say I need to take 2 damage, I could take damage that way and cover up 2 abilities. I could take damage this way. I could take damage that way. And when I'm exhausting abilities to use them, obviously I'm exhausting the one that I'm using. There's one rule here that you can't exhaust all the abilities in one column or the other column without having at least one exhausted in the other column. So this would be legal. Let's say I have to take 3 damage. I could take 3 damage either this way or this way. I could not take 3 damage like this. You can't turn your character 90 degrees sideways, in other words. Or let's say this was like a normal ability and I wanted to use it, and I was right here at the moment. I couldn't exhaust that one voluntarily without exhausting this one. Now I could do that if I wanted. I could exhaust this one just for the sake of getting to that one. And that's one thing that's important to note as well. If you're exhausting abilities to use them, let's say this is my game state and I really want to use this one, by exhausting it, not by discarding a strength card, but I really need to exhaust it to use it, you can skip over this one. You technically could activate it as well, but a lot of times you'll find yourself in a position where you'll say, I want to use this one. This one's no good to me right now, but I'm going to cover both of them up anyway so that I can use this middle row one. All right, so let's get to the boss fights. I might just have to set these down for a second to get us there. Okay. Let's just pretend. I'm just trying to get us to a realistic game state going into the boss fight. So let's just say I've defeated the last monster in the 5th wave, and this is where I'm at. Let's say I have, I don't know, these bottom 2 abilities exhausted going into the boss fight. Let me show you a closer view of the boss card here. Boss cards have no damage value, but they do have a really high health value. All boss cards have a special boss rule. That's this italicized text right here. And then they have 3 critical hits, and then they just tell you that they're a boss type down here. The basic way to defeat a boss is just how you defeat normal monsters. Let's say I had, I don't know, 3 or 4 really high strength cards over here. I could just discard those to the back, use them as strength attacks, and defeat him if I could total 25. Let's say I've done damage during the waves per my boss ability, if I can get that in focus. Discard a strength to do its armor as damage to a boss. Let's say I was able to do that a couple of times and I've gotten him down to 22 HP just by taking advantage of my boss ability during the waves. So now let's say I only have to discard strength up to 22, and then I've got him. You'll probably find that rarely happens, and you're going to have to take advantage of these critical hits. And what critical hits are is a way to magnify your strength attacks, essentially. There's 3 available for every boss. You can't use any one critical hit more than once in a boss fight. So if I use this one, I can't use it again, but you could use all 3 if you're able to. This is the damage 16 that I would do for this headshot critical hit if I pay the 2 costs associated with it. On the left side with the crossed swords, and I apologize, this wasn't my best print, so it's a little fuzzy, is the critical hits damage cost. On the right side of the critical hit is the critical hits strength cost. Strength cost is easy. I just have to pay a strength card or multiple strength cards of a value 7 or a value 9 or a value 4 to activate the critical hit. That's one cost of the critical hit. So I couldn't use my 6 to activate this headshot, but I could use my 9, except I'm not sure why I would do that because I kind of want to use my 9 more efficiently, except this 16 actually does more damage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the This right side with the heart is the strength cost, so you have to pay strength equal to that. The left side is damage cost. You actually have to take damage as well. So the visualization here is, while I'm going in there, I'm kind of opening myself up for attack to get in there and do this bigger blow against the boss. So I'm going to have to take some damage to get in there and do that. So let's say that I want to do this middle critical hit, because I've got this nice 9 here, and that would be a pretty efficient move against this critical hit. So I'm going to discard the 9 to pay the critical hit cost, or the strength cost, and then I have to take 2 damage. So I'll go ahead and take my 2 damage. And then I get to do 14 against him. So now I'm up to 14. If I would do another 6, I'm only up to 20. So I still wouldn't beat him. So I probably would kind of run that scenario in my head and decide, no, I got to figure something else out. And I actually had one more to exhaust there. So let's say I had done that, and oh, you know what? I could have got there, because I don't remember the math now, but I've only got this one left. I just did the 14, and what does 8 and 14 get me to? Oh no, I have to do math. 22. So if I had worn his health points down during the waves, and maybe I had him down to 22, then I'd have him. But so let's just, for illustration, let's activate this critical hit now, since I can afford to pay for it. So this 6 can pay the strength cost of 4. I'll pay the damage cost of 1, and then I get to do 8. So I basically turned that 6 into an 8 by using the critical hit. And that took me to 22. I haven't quite got him unless, like I said, unless I had whittled down his health during the waves. But then we need to talk about the boss rule. This one says take 1 damage to slot the lesser value half of the last defeated, I'm going to update that language, of the top of the underworld, and take 2 damage for the greater value half. So the top of the underworld would be the very back monster card in the deck, in the underworld. And so it says take 1 damage to slot the lesser value half of the last defeated, take 2 damage for the greater value half. So let's just say I'm going to do that. This would be the lesser value half, that's a 3. The greater value half would be a 7. I don't know. Why don't I just take the 7? And that means I'd have to pay 2. And then I get to use it, which that probably doesn't leave me with much to work with. But that's how that works. The other boss has a special rule too. After a critical hit, rotate your highest remaining strength card. And I won't tell you my strategy tips for fighting Azazel. I will try to let you figure that out on your own, but you can see she has a little more health to try to deal with. When you're fighting bosses, if you get there through a combination of either direct strength attacks or critical hits, you got them. If you meet or exceed that HP, you can end in a draw. So you obviously lose if you can't get there, but you can end in a draw, and that can happen a couple of ways. The first way is you can pay a critical hit cost. So let's say I've almost got him, and at this point, I really need to use this one in order to defeat him, but it's a damage cost of 2. So let's say I go through the motions, and I activate it, boom, he's dead, and then I take the damage cost of 2, and I've died in the process of killing him. So that's a draw. It's somewhere between winning and losing. The other way to end in a draw is if you had let monsters pass during the wave. So this guy's in the room with me. You resolve final damage. You still have to resolve final damage after the boss fight. So let's say I go through the boss fight and I have used critical hits, so I end up there. And then, so the boss is dead, but I still have to resolve my final damage. And so this is a really kind of a lame way to go out. I have to take final damage from the little bitty monster that was in the room with me, and then he finishes me off. So there's 2 ways to end in a draw. One thing that I should mention is this tracker card. It if you remember when we had set up, we had put it, like when we had set up the wave, we had put it in the back. And that's so when we get to the end, let's say we defeated all of them, we get to the end of the wave, reminded us we were on wave 1. When you're in the setup phase for the next wave, you just rotate that guy and put him in the back again. And then we go to 3, and then we go to 4. And then what I do when I reach the 5th wave is I put the boss, still behind my monster deck and in front of my strength cards, but then I put him in front of the tracker card, and I use this card to hold my character card up.